Hey everybody, I'm Chelsea Odhner, Vice President of Publishing at the Swedenborg Foundation, and I'm here to talk to you about one of our newest books, The New Church in the New World, in its fourth edition by Marguerite Beck Block. And this book was first published in 1932, and it quickly became a key resource for anyone interested in exploring Swedenborg and especially the history of the religious communities that developed around his writings in America. And this edition is the first in 40 years. And so when we set out to do this project and reprint it, we wanted to find somebody who could write a new introduction and epilogue and bring the history and research that Marguerite did back in the 20s and 30s all the way up to the present from its last edition in 1984. And so for that, we found Chris Barber, my guest today, who we're going to talk about this book and his work on the introduction and epilogue. And so Chris Barber he has master's degrees in New Church theology and education, and he's an ordained priest in the General Church of the New Jerusalem and teaches religion at the Academy of the New Church. And he studies and has a passion for church history and has actually even made Marguerite Beck Block herself a focus of his research. And so we were very lucky when he was willing to write this new introduction and epilogue for this new edition. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. I was really honored and humbled and a little afraid, actually, when I was invited to work on this project, because I love Marguerite. I love Dr. Block. I have been studying her for a couple years now, and I know her as a person, and I appreciate her as a scholar. And this was an opportunity for me to really bring those together and help to give her work, New Church in the New World, an extended shelf life, a renewed life, an opportunity to be found and used again.
Nice. Yeah, and that's something that I love. I'm so grateful for you to be writing the introduction, and the epilogue is really a substantial chunk at the back of this book. So you did some serious, thorough research, and you took a really comprehensive view of updating how the new church has evolved in America in all of its different contexts and settings. And so you researched a bunch of different new church denominations, and I wanted to just note that where we are right here is we are in Bernathen, Pennsylvania, which is the headquarters of the General Church of the New Jerusalem, where you work, as well as the headquarters of another denomination, the Lord's New Church, which is Nova Hierosolyma, that also has an international membership. And so we're grateful to the Lord's New Church for letting us do this interview in their beautiful space here. And so I'm just curious, because I don't know the answer to this question, of when you first came across this book, The New Church in the New World, and do you remember when you had your meet cute with it and what value you found in it then?
I do. I remember the first time I saw it. It was on a shelf in the used library book sale at the Academy of the New Church or the college in Bernathen. Mm-hmm. I saw it, and it had this garish silver spine, which is kind of famous within the New Church. A lot of people know the silver spine. And I pulled it off the shelf, and I was taking a look through it. And the one that I had found was full of notes. And I found later on it was actually hard to find a copy that didn't have notes in it, because this book was also a textbook that was used in church history classes at the college. And so people would take notes as they went through, and then when they were finished with it, many of them would sell it back to the school or just donate it to the library, which would then sell it.
Yeah.
I later on took that church history course, and I had the opportunity to really read the book. And I fell in love with it, largely because of its easy history. It's a very conversational book at times. You read it, and it feels like Dr. Block is telling you the story. And one of the things that people loved about the book when it initially came out was it was comprehensive and told with affection, didn't feel too biased in favor of any of the groups that it was talking about, but it was just something that felt like it was bringing you up to speed and wasn't too heavy of a tome.
Yeah.
And I found that for myself as well.
Yeah, and it's really, those qualities have made it endure, and continue as being a regular resource. Like I remember reading it myself and finding the tone really accessible. And partly that's definitely who Marguerite Beck Block, Dr. Block was. And she was at, is it Columbia University? And so she was doing her doctoral program on, and she studied this new religious movement of the Swedenborgian influence in America. But she herself wasn't Swedenborgian, right? And so she also brings that, where she was really looking at it from an outsider, but an affectionate, or like a genuinely curious, interested outsider who wanted to understand the influence of Swedenborg. And I'd love for you to speak a little bit to her evolution in her life, because I know Swedenborg then became, stayed with her the rest of her life. That wasn't just, her doctoral program and she left it behind. And so I'd love to have you speak to that, as well as what about Dr. Block has gripped you, because I know she is a focus of your study. Yeah,
thanks so much. It's a great question. I want to start, I suppose, at the beginning of her knowledge of the new church. And what I could find was she learned about the new church on a boat.
Okay.
She was on a boat and she met a man Clarence Barron, who was a famous in his own right at the time, but he was a new churchman. And he was very interested in spreading the church and making sure that people had access to the texts. He helped to fund and organize for some translation work. And he also apparently was an avid sailor, maybe even owned a couple of yachts himself. I don't know when she met him specifically, but when they met, he mentioned the new church to her, and it stuck with her. And so when it was time for her to do her doctoral work, she started looking into this a little bit more and then really became hooked. She found a story that had been told, but only within new church groups, not by any outsiders. At least not by any outsiders who were trying to tell their story for who they were. There were some people who told their story to take them down. There were some people who would look at new church doctrine, Swedenborgian theology, and identify everything that they thought was wrong with it. But no one who really looked at it as a group that was just worthy of having its story be told.
Yeah.
And that's what Marguerite ends up doing in this book, is just telling their story. Why? Because they exist. And what she finds is there are a number of influences that are worthwhile. Literary and artistic influences, political connections. But you get this sense from her that by the time she's finished this book, she's really developed affection herself for these people.
Is it true that her degree was sociology, or am I making that up? Or what was the degree that she was doing this research as a part
It was in their newly formed religion department.
Okay, it was a religion department.
Yeah, so it was
program.
Religion specifically is what she was interested in. And later on, she was hyper-focused on the history of religions.
Yes, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, so great. So grateful to Dr. Block for doing that.
Oh, me too. And when you look at records, old articles from the Brynathan Post, right, the town newspaper, or you look at records from another denomination, another branch, the convention, the General Convention, you find record of her showing up and people enjoying her presence and her enjoying theirs, and actually keeping up a bit of a correspondence with a number of people after she left. There are some postcards, for instance, that are in the archives in Brynathan here, where she was in Sweden, and she sent a card back to express appreciation and just to say hello to some of the people she met while she was doing her research. So she was affected by it. She really was. And it never left her. So the town of Brynathan, she felt strongly about that. And the convention, she ends up becoming a part of a journal that is being published largely by some General Convention folks. Again, this other branch of New Church. And she even took Swedenborg on as a historical figure of affection and note for her.
Right, Swedenborg himself, right, not just the church history.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. And that's something that I wanted to bring up, that it's in the title, The New Church in the New World. And for anybody who's totally new to it, those are pretty generic terms, the new church. And yet that is a term within the Swedenborgian tradition that you're going to hear a lot. And Swedenborg talks about the new church. A lot of the churches in the 19th century hooked on to what he talked about, the New Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of curious. I haven't done a study of like, what did the churches always call themselves? But really the new church has sort of won out over anything else as being sort of the moniker that people refer to anything that sort of has Swedenborg's teachings at its heart, I guess is what you would say. Or I'm curious to hear how would you define that term, the new church? How it came to be.
I'm glad you asked it, because there have been different terms used throughout church history, but the new church is one that really has endured. Swedenborg talks about the new church within the writings, and it's this new era of Christianity, which actually is a restoration of true Christianity, getting away from some of the doctrines that Swedenborg offers have taken away from the ability of people to have a personal relationship with God, mm-hmm. who is the Lord God, Jesus Christ. And this image of the New Jerusalem from Revelation, the New Jerusalem descending, they're all part of the same conversation. Mm-hmm. And it feels new, but it's a little bit like something that humanity lost and is now being restored. Mm-hmm. This understanding of who and what God really is. Yeah. And so the new church is this umbrella term that can be used. You also find it in organizational names. But you also find the New Jerusalem in organizational names. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think that you pinned it really nicely. Organizations that have at their core the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, the theological writings of Emanuel mm-hmm, Swedenborg, mm-hmm. are new church organizations. Yeah.
And I, as someone myself who has an appreciation of sort of interfaith studies and interreligious studies and sort of the spiritual longing that people have, whether it's within any religious context or not, like something that I love about Swedenborg's works is how accessible they are to people that, even though Swedenborg was writing within a Christian context, and we find this all the time in the people who respond to the videos on the Off the Left Eye channel and everything, is like, there is something sort of salient about the way Swedenborg talks about these spiritual ideas that almost lifts it out of sort of an external idea of even what Christianity is, or like getting sort of into the essence of religious or spiritual ideas or something. Anyway,
lifts it so far out at times that there are people who will say the new church is not Christian.
I
think in the new edition of New Church in the New World, there is. I referenced this one group, I think it was the Lutheran Synod of something or other. Mm-hmm. But at one point, there was a report that was presented within that, and they said that the new church is not Christian. Mm-hmm. Because it really does step away from a lot of the, well, I would call it the baggage of old Christianity. And people notice. People notice. And some people notice and are moved by it and say, thank goodness, this is what I've always believed.
Yes, right? Definitely.
Other people see it and see that it's so different and say, this is heresy, this has got to go.
Yeah.
What's fascinating to me, I think, is, and I include it in I think it's the last thing I put in the epilogue at the end of the new edition. It's a quote from Marguerite where she herself offers that she's not so sure what the truth is, but she feels that the writings of Swedenborg have more of it than any other place she's ever looked. So you asked earlier, what was her later affection for this?
Yes.
How did this change her? She never became New Church herself, at least not. Right. She didn't join a group. She didn't attend the services as part of her life after she was doing this research. But she said, there's truth in here, and I see it.
Yeah, and that itself points to sort of, when we say the new church, sometimes people use that term to say, okay, are you affiliated with a specific new church organization? But then there's other people who might feel like they're a part of the new church as just this larger paradigm, this larger spiritual movement, you could say, or something that resonates with what Swedenborg said. So it's such a fascinating subject to just sort of like drill into the new church as a term on its own.
Yes, I do ask in the book a little bit, what does it take to be called new church? How do you, what markers need to be there in order to say, yes, I am? And I think you'll find different groups would have different answers.
Yeah.
There are some groups, for instance, I mentioned in here a group called the Garden Church out in California, and they don't have a membership. They're a church without a membership. The Wayfarers Chapel, which recently has been dismantled due to threat from mudslides, landslides.
In California.
This church also doesn't have a traditional membership. It's for wayfarers. It's for people who pass through and can stop in and worship. And then you get other places that do feel more traditional, where there is a list of, can you agree to these things? If so, then welcome. And if not, then you're welcome to stay, but you're not going to sign the line.
Right. And that's something that I love about the approach that you took, or just yourself as a writer and a researcher, is just you have a genuine interest and respect and curiosity about all of those different perspectives, and you can really feel that in your writing in the epilogue of like I feel like people get a really wide survey of kind of the pulse of people who are in relationship with this thing that is the new church that Swedenborg talks about. And what you're saying too is that dance has been happening ever since Swedenborg wrote his books. It has never been defined to such an extent that there's kind of, well, this is it and that's not it. Everybody's always in relationship with what did Swedenborg write about it. And so one of Block's central questions was, what is the new church? And she asks that in the book, I think in the beginning and at the end. And I'm curious how you see, or what you found of like how Swedenborgian communities are defining themselves today, or how that's, having read the book and then lived through the history that you wrote about, how are you seeing that relationship to this term, the new church, changing in any particular way? Or continuing to evolve, or anything like that?
I think that I could approach the question a little bit from praxis, from practice, how churches are convening, how people are convening. And there is some evolution in that. A lot of tried and true liturgies and orders of service, but you do see some new things that are happening. I guess I'll start, just here with this group, the Swedenborg Foundation. The Off the Left Eye program is really an amazing development in church history and new church history. I think it is safe to say that program has the greatest reach of any Swedenborgian outlet in the history of the new church. It's really remarkable. I was thinking about that while I was writing, and just thinking that I don't know if I had appreciated that fact before. And it's not a church. It is a place where it's a virtual place where people are able to gather and learn together. If you ever spend time in the comments sections, you see that there is real meaningful conversation happening there. Life change for people is being documented in there. People who say that my life has changed because of this material, who then go beyond the videos and start to read the material, read the doctrine, read the books, participate in online groups as they are, and find new community. Is that a church? I'm not going to say it's not. I'm not going to say it is. It's a new thing. But just like we were talking about a little bit earlier, what is the new church? Well, it's a place that is centered around the writings, the theological writings of Emanuel Swedenborg. Off the Left Eye is like that. The General Church of the New Jerusalem had a program like that online. Big Spiritual Questions. I talk about that in the epilogue, which was really impressive, and a similar kind of outlet for answering the big questions that people have and saying, as an invitation, here's a way to look at it. And there are a number of folks who, similarly to what Off the Left Eye was doing, would write in and would say how meaningful this was. So I think a lot of the internet is showing a new way of doing spiritual change and spiritual community. You see it in the convention as well, or the Swedenborgian Church of North America, which has they're developing chaplaincy programs, and they have their retreat programs, which are developing. Again, you've got folks coming in, and you can't necessarily keep tabs on them when they leave. You don't necessarily know how they've been changed, but it's not given to everyone to know the ripples of their own impact. And so I've found that a lot of the new church experience, especially in community, is learning to let go. Learning to let go of who has changed, and learning to let go of numbers. And to appreciate the fact that the New Jerusalem is descending. The word is getting out. The teachings of the new church, the writings of Swedenborg are making a difference for people in a way that's not going to comfortably fit in on a ledger. It's not going to happen in a way that it's necessarily looked like before. And I think we have to be okay with that.
And it's interesting, just makes me think of how Swedenborg, we kind of can't say the new church without bringing it up, that for Swedenborg, that word church has a lot of definitions, and the core of it is really something that's happening within the heart and mind of a person, that each person is a church in miniature, and it's really just opening one's heart and mind to the influence of heaven, and the Lord's love and wisdom flowing in. And if that's your, that sense of a church is something that's very personal. So we wouldn't know unless we could talk to everybody who's watching the videos or everything to feel like, how is this affecting your heart? How is this affecting your life? And then that they might, it's a feeling, and then that grows and has influence and ripples out into the world. And so,
Absolutely. And if church becomes an abstract only thing or an internal only thing, we do lose out on a lot of the value of it, which is community and having people who are in your corner when things are challenging. You can have the church within you, but then when you're sick, the church within you can't bring you soup, for example. And so there remains value in the older forms of gathering in a building and going on retreats or going on trips or having reading circles that meet in a space. That remains valuable, and you find that still as well. It's just I'm appreciating a little bit more on the other side of working on this new edition of New Church in the New World. I'm appreciating more the variety that's out there. As someone who is working in a more traditional environment, I like numbers. The numbers really do matter. I want to see the numbers grow, not for their own sake, but because it's representative of something. It's people. It is a kind of, a growth in the natural that is showing us that there is an internal spiritual work going as well.
That those two things are always in relationship with each other, and that we are inherently relational beings. We can't exist without each other. And so I guess holding all of that, what do you imagine, if anything, sort of 20 years out, 50 years out, for where Swedenborgianism or new church-centric communities are going, or what those new forms might look like, especially, as we're in the, social media, or even shifting social media, how we connect with each other locally and in a more wider context.
I have to say, I don't think I dare imagine who could have imagined now 20 years ago. And I do wonder, what would Marguerite think? What would Dr. Block think? If she could see what we've become. She does offer a little bit of a prediction, just specifically for the Brynathan Church. But and when I look at her little prediction about how she thinks things will change, and it's in the new edition here, so you can get a copy and look it up yourselves if you'd like. But I think that predictions tend to say more about where we're coming from and what our individual hopes are than maybe informed background or any sort of reasonable prognostication.
Yeah.
I will say for myself, where I hope it'll go, I do hope that it will. I hope that the new church will become more of a household name. Mm-hmm. I hope that Swedenborg will become more of a household name like it used to be, like he used to be.
Yeah.
He was known much more in the past, and I think we're headed that way.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that the ease of getting the word out, I think that the social media tools that are available, the targeted advertising, the algorithm for all of its good and ills, it will make it easier for people to happen upon and encounter the new church without it just being in the context of Johnny Appleseed, who, a lot of people know about the new church because of Johnny Appleseed. What if more people knew about the new church because of their grief? What if more people knew about the new church because of their questions about Scripture? What if more people knew about the new church because of what they were wondering about when it came to what's awaiting them on the other side, or the structure of their mind, or how this world is reflecting a greater beyond, about how everything in this natural world speaks of what is good and what is true and what exists at the core of the divine?
Yeah.
What if it wasn't just the funny figures from history, or the famous people, but what if it was because of that deep search that people have? And I think people are going to find the new church more easily down the line.
Yeah.
What that's going to look like? Are they going to form new reading groups, just like the earliest groups of new church people were reading groups? I don't know. I don't think I dare guess. But I do hope that they find it because they recognize that there is a need that these books can fill.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you say that really well, and it just makes me think that I feel like there's something, the amount of material that we pump out into the world through the Off the Left Eye YouTube channel and the millions and millions of views that we get. It's like, I always just wonder, we're going to hit some saturation point, or not even a saturation point, but like seeds are going to start coming up above ground. And I just imagine that for myself, that's going to be a lot of sort of grassroots, just independent organizational efforts that are people, in my mind, it's like people who are connecting what Swedenborg says with other areas or things in their life, and, finding use and value to these ideas, and then, applying them, or having certain like service-oriented groups or different things like that. That's what sort of comes to my mind as just like, I feel like it can't help but happen because of just the nature of humanity. And it makes me think too that whatever happens for the new church is really reflective of just what's happening in our global community as a human family as well. Like just what societies do, I think, sort of evolve together. So it'll just be interesting to see how that, what might be coming down the road.
Yeah, I mean, the needs are going to dictate the questions that people are asking, and that's going to impact the answers that they latch on to.
Yeah.
I marvel at the idea that Swedenborg himself offered, that he thought a book called Earths in the Universe was going to be a great book for evangelization. And today it's one of the ones where we're not quite sure what to do with it. And there are different ways of interpreting it that people have brought about. But you just never know what questions people are going to be asking down the line.
Yeah.
And so what I think New Church in the New World does really well is I think that it gives enough of a skeleton for future researchers to come back to. There's a lot of meat on the bones, but it gives enough of a skeleton. But we do need new history. This new edition of New Church in the New World, I think it's important to have out there.
Yeah.
And I think what I have done is supply material that really has been grafted on to a sturdy old trunk.
Yes.
It's still alive.
Yep.
It's still got its roots set in the ground, and yet there could be some new work that's done that incorporates some of the research about the Black communities in America that really haven't been included. The women's movements that have been involved that really get mentioned but aren't deeply studied in New Church in the New World. Figures who are hidden away in archives that we're starting to be aware of more and more now, but adding them back into New Church in the New World, that's challenging, because I think that Dr. Block's work, Marguerite's work, is good. And I like that this new edition has preserved the integrity of her edition. We haven't gone in and made changes. We haven't added chapters. But that in itself is a call for New Church historians to take up the pen, to start doing the research, and to start again from the beginning. I'm hoping that this book will inspire somebody to do that. It's not going to be me.
I was going to say, you and I do share a passion for studying church history, and even if neither of us necessarily pen our own work someday, but we both know firsthand, it's such an interesting history. There's so much there, and I just feel like it's just, somebody could do any number of New Church in the New World books on different angles of Swedenborg's influence in America, let alone other countries. I mean, it's just like there's a huge amount of influence and interesting new angles and insights too that would be really useful to understand. So
and historical frameworks within which to study. And I would love to see what people would do with this history. I think that the more people are aware of it, other PhD students will find, there's gold in them thar hills. And they'll take it up.
Yep. And that is something that we were mindful of when we produced this volume is, like you said, it is the first time since its original publication that it was laid out. Like, we created a new layout for this book, but otherwise everything is intact from Marguerite's first edition. And then we even kept the 1984 the previous edition's introduction and epilogue as appendices, so that somebody can, within this one volume, also kind of experience the history of this work in its totality. And then in addition to your wonderful epilogue and introduction that have brought it up to the present. So what is one thing that you would hope a new reader would get out of reading The New Church in the New World?
One thing, it's interesting, because the thing that I hope they would get out of it isn't necessarily New Church specific, but it's every group deserves its time. Every group has its lessons that can teach, no matter how big or small or how new or how old. And there's just so much within the New Church that I don't know if I'm going to wander outside of this arena, because there's so much more to study and to learn and stories to tell. But I hope other people who pick it up will see that there is value in the human story. And Marguerite, she gave the New Church a chance. She gave this strange little group that she heard about on a boat, maybe up in Massachusetts. She gave us a chance, and it became a life meaning for her. It changed her life. And it was the first real history of the New Church that was offered. Nearly a century later, it is still in use. It is still a valuable resource. It is still cited in new scholarship. Sometimes as the sole resource on the New Church. She's trusted so much. Our human stories need to be told. And as much as I hope other people will come to the New Church and take up the study and offer some new histories and find some incredible stories to share, I hope they'll also look out there and wonder who has been underattended, who has been left in the corners, in the shadows, who can we highlight? Because we learn from each other. One of the things that we learned from the doctrines of Swedenborg, the writings for the New Church, is there's good in all religions. There are people out there who are doing their best with the things that they know, and they're making positive difference. Tell their stories, because those stories can become the inspiration for people who pick them up. Oh, so beautifully said, Chris. Thank you so much for coming and being a part of this interview with me and answering all these questions so wonderfully. I just really appreciate you being here. Well, thank you so much. And I just have to say thank you to the Swedenborg Foundation and to you. We worked so well together during this process. I love Dr. Block. She's really an important figure to me. And I think people in the New Church should see her as an important figure to them as well, because she gave us a chance. And the story that she told, I think it does have reach. And so I hope people pick up this book.
Nice, yes. And you can pick it up. You can order it at Swedenborg.com or at Amazon. The New Church in the New World. It's available in print. We'll be coming out with an ebook later this year. But for now, get your lovely print copy with all these lovely images on the cover, which are historical to the New Church. And then there's even a cover legend at the back of the book that gives the historical detail on what each of the images are. So this is a wonderful resource, and get your hands on a copy. And thanks for watching.